good morning. So it's my pleasure to introduce Jeffery Horsburgh. He's a professor at the Utah State University in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering at Logan United States. So we never met before with Jeffery, but I have a feeling that I know him since about 10 years because when we started to develop the TEIA OZCAR information system, we read lots of the paper about what they were doing in the US, and Jeffery was the main author of several of these papers. So they developed all the data management system of the QASHI, which is the consortium of university working in hydrology in the USA. So Jeffery is going to present what they have done. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you for that introduction, and thank you so much for the invitation to come and talk. I'm really happy to be here, and I'm excited about the talks that I've heard so far. I've learned so much just from hearing the talks that I've participated in here. So maybe first I'll start with just a little bit of history. So in the United States, in 2020, the National Science Foundation in the US funded the Critical Zone Collaborative Network. So this is a network of 9 major research projects that were funded to study different aspects of the critical zone. And there's a card here for each one of these thematic cluster projects, and you can see they're quite different and diverse, and that's going to be a thread through my story today because that presented some interesting challenges for us when it comes to sharing and integrating data. So they also funded one coordinating hub that was a project that was supposed to sort of do coordination of education and outreach activities, sort of coordinate the activities and conferences of this organization, and also to coordinate the data sharing activities. And so that's my part of this, was sort of focused on the data collection and sharing. So in the solicitation for this, the U.S. National Science Foundation put out these words, and they said, like, the coordinating hub will ensure the compatibility of the measurements across the various clusters, lead the data management of the network by establishing procedures for data collection, standardization, central archiving, and access by the research community. And when I read those words, I was really excited because it sounded like a really great challenge. But we didn't know who the thematic cluster projects were going to be when we wrote our proposal. And so what I thought was going to happen is not what happened, because then they funded the clusters. And I thought to myself, oh no. How do we integrate data from people studying bedrock with geophysics, with people studying stream water chemistry in urban environments, with people doing DNA sequencing and microbiology stuff, with people studying dust? And then that's where things started getting pretty interesting, right? So the types and amount of data being collected by these different groups is very, very different, and that led to some challenges. So the thematic cluster teams are diverse. As you look around the room, you look at the different scientists in the room, you all are very diverse as well. Some are collecting new data, some are using historical data, some are aggregating across different data types and all of this kind of stuff. And we knew from the beginning, even before we knew who the thematic clusters were, that there was no single data repository that was going to work for all of these people to put their data in. And so that was part of our design from the beginning. But our objective was, hopefully you've heard of the FAIR data principles. If you haven't, then here's your introduction. FAIR stands for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. But our goal was to provide a robust cyber infrastructure for this broad group of scientists to share their data in a way that they are fair. So working across these thematic clusters, we wanted everybody to share their data in reputable repositories so that they could be found, accessed, used, and reused. And so this was our thought about what that approach was going to look like. Okay, so there's these diverse data and research projects from critical zone scientists. Each one of these thematic cluster projects we anticipated would have a data manager that would help the scientists within that project sort of get their data together, get them formatted in a nice way, get them into a reputable repository. They would do all of the data collection and aggregation within their thematic cluster. And what we would do is we would build for them a data submission portal that would allow them to submit their data to reputable repositories through one place. So instead of going to 5 different repositories, let's give them a data submission portal where they can go and they can submit their data in one place, they learn how to use one system, and it can then shoot the data to whatever repository the data needs to go to. So that's what we were going to build. And we wanted to do that because we didn't want to create yet another repository. There are very good domain-specific data repositories out there. We didn't want to build another one, and so we also had people on our team that were operating the HydroShare repository. Kirsten Leonard runs the EarthChem repository, and we sort of were thinking of Zenodo as kind of a catch-all repository if there was stuff that didn't fit into either of those other two. But we wanted to design this in a way that we could also add other repositories as needed as the projects went on. And then in the end, because we were spreading data across those different repositories where they were appropriately to be submitted, we wanted to have a cataloging and discovery system that would have a coordinated view of all of those data regardless of where they lived in which repository. Okay, so that data submission portal, we built this as a web application supporting the Critical Zone Collaborative Network, and it enables submission to multiple geoscience data repositories through one portal. So people can come to this website, they can choose which repository they want to submit data to, they fill out the form, and I'll show you how this process works here in just a second. And our idea here is that we wanted to empower those data managers from each of these thematic cluster projects to curate the research products from their projects within these reputable repositories with support from the CZ Hub team. Okay, and we started with these 3 repositories, HydroShare, EarthChem, and Zenodo. And we also added the ability to register data sets that were already deposited in repositories because we knew that there were some groups that either because of partnerships with long-term ecological research projects or Department of Energy projects in the US that had requirements to submit to other repositories. We wanted to make sure we could account for those data sets as well. But this also allowed us to do some cool things like we could promote the use of FAIR principles by directing data to good repositories. We could make sure that we had access control that would give people the ability to share their data internally at first, but then open it up more broadly later on. Make sure that the data is citable in the end, and we were also leveraging existing National Science Foundation infrastructure investment where they had already invested in these repositories, so it made sense for data to be going into these repositories. And what that data product submission workflow looks like is something like this. So somebody who has a data set, they come to the data submission portal, they select a repository. So which is the right repository? I'll talk about that in just a second. They choose a repository, they authorize the portal to submit to that repository using their user account, and that's managed using an open authentication protocol. They get a form, and they drop their data file content on that form. They fill out the basic metadata on the form, and they specify which files are going to be uploaded. They hit the Go button, and it submits that content to the repository through the repository's application programming interface, and it keeps a record in the data submission portal of what they have submitted and where it's been submitted to, and the end result is if you go to the actual repository, there's a new data set with a landing page. When they formally publish the data set, they get a digital object identifier, and now they have a data set that's actually been deposited and it's accessible in a repository. Okay, and we created this system to do this multi-repository deposition using some interoperability that we built through JSON schema-based metadata. And what this is just a fancy way of saying we developed a schema for the metadata for each one of these repositories, and that's encoded as JavaScript object notation. And then the data submission portal reads that JSON schema, produces a form directly from that schema, and that's the form that people fill out when they actually submit the data. Okay, so Adding a new repository to this system is just a matter of mapping the metadata from that repository to a JSON schema, which we can then expose via a form that allows people to fill out the metadata. Let's see. So the other advantages of this process are that we can keep a record of everything that everybody has submitted to the data submission portal. Okay, so without the data submission portal, investigators, the data managers, they would have to go to each one of these individual repositories. They would have to figure out, like, how do I actually submit data to this repository versus this other repository? And also, as the thematic, as the hub team, we wouldn't necessarily know where people were submitting data or how many data sets they'd submitted, and it would be really hard for us to track that. So having people submitting through the data submission portal actually gave us a record of everything that had been submitted as well. So that was a real great advantage for us, because now we can keep track of everything that's been submitted and keep a copy of all of the metadata that's associated with those data sets that we can then deposit in our catalog. Okay, so with the data submission portal, now they only have to learn one user interface, that data submission portal. It does the work of sending the data over to the partner repositories, and it ensures a few other things. Let's see. Sorry, I'm seeing something different on this screen than I'm seeing on this screen. That's really confusing. Sorry about that. Okay, so this allows us to ensure that the data products end up in an appropriate trusted repository, and that's great. Single interface, direct submission, user registration, they're able to do that all themselves. And it also allows us to validate a few things and promote consistency in some of the metadata. So things like minimum metadata requirements, keywords, funding agency information, so that we can actually track which project is associated with which data set, all of that kind of stuff. We were able to promote some data format templates, common formats, best practices, because they're submitting through our user interface. We can sort of check on those things before we send the data to the repository. And it helps them track what's been submitted, and it helps us make sure that we have simple, consistent, and automated registration of those data sets with a metadata index for discovery. Okay, so that leads us to discovery. Like, once we've facilitated putting all of these data in these different repositories, how do we make sure that people can come back and actually discover those data sets, given that they're spread all over the place? For that, we built the catalog and discovery portal for CZNet, and this is just a cross-repository view of CZNet data and research products. So you can do discovery based on keywords, authors, geographic area, time, the actual project, the repository. So basically all the kinds of data discovery things that you see in other portals or repositories. And we achieved interoperability across these through a metadata schema called schema.org. So how does that work? Okay, so if you're a critical zone scientist and you want to access data from CZNet, you would come to the catalog and discovery system, you would put in your search terms, and you would filter the results. And what that application is doing is it's hitting this metadata index down here at the bottom, and it's saying, okay, give me all of the data sets that match these search criteria. But to do that, we actually use the data submission portal, and all of those data sets that are submitted through the data submission portal or registered with the data submission portal, they get registered with a metadata harvester, and that metadata harvester goes to the individual repositories, and it harvests the schema.org metadata that's embedded in the landing pages of each one of those data sets. And that's really nice, because that data set, that metadata exists in the landing pages. We can go, we can harvest it, we can re-harvest it just in case things have changed. And so we have a little worker process in the background that goes and harvests that metadata all the time and keeps that metadata index up to date. So all of this is automated, and you can see here all of these arrows and boxes and all of that kind of stuff. There are some moving parts. And all of those moving parts have to be maintained, and that's one of the sort of disadvantages of a system like this, is it's a little bit fragile. Okay, so now that you've sort of seen some of the infrastructure that we built, I want to talk about some of the challenges and opportunities that we have noticed as we've sort of progressed through the Critical Zone Collaborative Network project. We're now, most of these projects are now in a no-cost extension year at the end of their 5-year cooperative agreements with NSF. So we're nearing the end of this particular program. And so I think it's a good time to think about challenges and opportunities. And I suspect that what I'm going to say in the next series of slides is probably not so unfamiliar to all of you. You've probably experienced a lot of these same kinds of things. Okay, so number one, building a collaborative network of scientists takes time. You all know this, but sharing network data takes longer. So CZNet was funded in 2020, probably the worst possible time to fund a collaborative network because of COVID, right? So it was really hard to get the staffing going. It was really hard to get field work going. And so this plot that you're seeing is actually the number of data sets shared by this network, and it really didn't even start until 2022. So we had this big, long lag. And I think even without COVID, that lag would have been there. COVID made it worse, okay? So data sharing really only started in 2022, and it started to take off more recently, but we're still kind of waiting for some of the data to come in because it's late in the process, and we feel like there should be a lot more data sets here, but there aren't quite yet. Okay, so challenges. Building this infrastructure took time. Data sharing significantly lags collection. And then readiness for data sharing, it really varied across these projects. Like some of these projects didn't even include funding for a data manager in their project, which was a bit of an oversight that they corrected later on. But you know, when you've got a $5 million project from the National Science Foundation, you probably need some data management support. Just saying. So some opportunities here, and I apologize, some of you probably can't see this because of the black screen, but mainly from the funder perspective, like when we're talking to our funding agencies, we probably should be talking about how this lag in funding and project schedules is a real thing. It's always going to be a thing. There's going to be this lag between data collection and data sharing. And that might mean that we need to vary project schedules. If we're going to fund a hub to do data sharing and management, it might need to be funded on a different timescale than the actual science projects. I would suggest that we invest early in data management training, because on these projects there were a lot of people who just, the whole data sharing thing was either new because they're a student and they've never done it before, or it was an expectation that they had not had on projects that they had run before. Invest later in data curation. So that's not a free thing, right? Stagger projects, explicitly define data management, requirements in the solicitation, and then this is something that our agencies in the US are not really great about enforcing those requirements. The requirements are there. They tell you, thou shalt share data, but they don't really enforce it that well. Okay, number two, so cross-repository data submission interoperability is possible, but this is actually pretty challenging to maintain. So we built this data submission portal, we did this schema-based metadata, we achieved this way of working through one user interface, and there are some really great advantages to this, but there are some challenges as well. So those metadata schemas, they change. We had some issues with Zenodo over time. They changed their metadata schema, they changed their application programming interface, they didn't change their documentation, which made it really hard for our developers to actually update anything. So those are all challenges to this approach, and also the value proposition of actually doing this work depends a lot on whether people are using it. So it's totally worth it to do this if people are going to use it, but if people aren't using it, then the value proposition sort of becomes a little bit lower. So opportunities, these are mainly for repositories, and I realize there may not be a lot of people in this room that represent data repositories, but all of you are users of data repositories, and I guarantee you if you all hit up your data repositories and say, we must have this, they will likely listen. So we want to promote scientific metadata consistency across repositories. I was actually really quite surprised when I sat down and compared HydroShare to EarthChem, the amount of similarity there is between the metadata that is collected by those repositories, even though one is like a general hydrology repository and one is a geochemistry repository. But they still have a lot of really similar metadata. EarthChem didn't have an application programming interface at the beginning, and we built one as part of this project, and we built one that was relatively consistent with what HydroShare had. And so advancing standardized API functionality across repositories, like they don't have to be exactly the same, but they can be similar, and it can work. Okay, so choosing a repository is not always easy. It's not always clear where you should put your data, and so we built a little choose your own adventure guide that asks you some question like, are you sharing hydrology data? Is it time series? You should consider using HydroShare. And then you might also consider this thing. So it's like a little guide to help you choose which repository you should use. It's generally split by data types or categories, and the challenges are that some of these data types fit in multiple categories, right? It's not always clear which one they fit into. Probably a bigger challenge for us is that some scientists are choosing which repository to put their data in, not based on where it fits best, but on where the least amount of effort is required to get their data into a repository. Like, we're all sort of human. We choose the easy road, right? But fragmentation across repositories, particularly for data sets that are similar, and if we had them in a similar repository, synthesis would be easier, right? So some opportunities here. Approach the final disposition of data as a matter of network and community design. If you want all of the data of a particular type to end up in a particular place in a particular format, that should be part of the design of your project or your community and your network. And you have to consider community needs, the data capacity, and ease of use. Okay, so this just shows you a distribution of where the data sets for this network have shown up. The large disproportionate use of HydroShare versus EarthChem, that's probably because HydroShare is easier than EarthChem. EarthChem has a curation step where they actually look at your data and make sure you've used the template and you've used the vocabularies and you've done all of this kind of stuff. It's great, it's awesome. It's like a little bit of peer review for your data, but not everybody wants to go through that. Okay, so standardized metadata help with coordinated data discovery. So Catalog and Discovery app provides a coordinated view. This is discovery based on standardized schema.org metadata. And the challenge is not all repositories provide this metadata. Some massaging of that metadata is required. And there's a few moving parts, as I said here. But these are technical challenges that can be overcome, as we've demonstrated. And there's some opportunities here. So again, promote use of schema.org in the repositories. Like, embed this stuff in the landing pages, then we can harvest it. It's really good. It helps us do data discovery. And that might mean that we need to advance schema.org a little bit as a community of data scientists to actually better describe the data sets that we actually have in our repositories. There are some opportunities for reusing this software. If you're interested in a data catalog and discovery app, it's really straightforward. It's pretty easy to use. If you want to use it, you're welcome to. It's open source. Okay, so I'm going to talk about best practices too. So best practices help, but there's no one-size-fits-all solution. So we developed a whole bunch of best practices for this community. We got together with the data managers. We asked them what they wanted to do. We suggested to them what they ought to do. And then we encoded all of that into a set of best practices. And we stored all of that in GitHub. So when people ask questions, it's a great place to say, oh, well, have you read this best practice? You point them to that, and they're like, oh, okay, I get it now, what I'm supposed to do. So challenges here, most domain scientists, they either lack the expertise or they don't really want to do this work of best practices. A lot of them are just like, just tell me what to do and that's what I'll do. And there are always unique situations to work through. Not all of the data sets actually fit the best practices that we've developed. So there's some opportunities here. So approach practices as a matter of design, allow time for a community to mature, and community serving organizations like COASI in the US, that consortium of universities, can actually help build best practices for a community. Okay, so motives for sharing data vary. Some people want published research results with a DOI in a repository. Some people want increased opportunities for sharing, collaboration, and synthesis. Some people want greater transparency and reproducibility. Some people just want compliance with funding agency regulations and journal publisher requirements, right? Like, but in reality, it's probably some combination of all of these things. And so aligning these is kind of challenging because we don't actually know all the time what's motivating people and what's going to be the best motivation for them to do their data sharing. Some people still see this as extra work. I would like to really, like, if I had one take-home message here, it's this. Train a generation of scientists that data management and sharing is not extra work, it's just part of the science that we do. There's also this open data citation advantage. There's lots of studies out there that will show you that if you share your data openly, your papers actually get cited more. Like, that's a thing. It's a real thing. Okay. data synthesis doesn't just happen. So no matter how you slice, whatever figure of the critical zone you use here, however you slice it, whatever science you're doing, you're going to be putting together lots of different pieces, right? So you're working interdisciplinary, you're working from the top to the bottom or the bottom to the top, whichever direction you're going, you're always going to be doing some synthesis, and data is part of that. It's like pervasive throughout it. Connecting the critical zone requires a high degree of synthesis, and that means that we need to be able to put the data together in useful and innovative ways. And so some challenges here, particular to this network, maybe 9 thematic cluster projects that were not really tied together in any way, was probably not the best network design for synthesis. Post hoc synthesis produces different results or it just may not happen at all if it wasn't part of the original design. And then harmonizing data requires some activation energy, right? It requires energy to actually do that. So again, I feel like I'm sort of hitting the same note here over and over again. Approach synthesis by design. If you want to do synthesis and your research questions require synthesis, collect the data that allow you to do synthesis and share the data in a way that allows you to do that synthesis. Okay, so despite challenges in the critical zone collaborative network, some success. So I think the data sharing in this group is maturing. The body of shared CZNet data is growing. We have a catalog and discovery system that allows people to go and discover and access these data sets wherever they reside in the repositories. And we do anticipate that there's going to be more action as people reach the end of their projects and sort of have the really hurried, oh, I've just read the terms and conditions of my cooperative agreement with NSF and I have to check all the boxes and now I need to deposit all of my data in year 6. So we anticipate that there's going to be some more action within this last year. But people are talking about the data, the number of data sets is growing, and we're excited about that. So with that, I will leave you. Here's my contact information, and thank you for your time and attention.